Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the movie Thor, Love and Thunder. And I overall enjoyed this movie. I had fun with it, and I was pretty glad that I saw it. And just to give you some info, pricing, at least at my movie theater, was the same as Doctor Strange, but keep an eye out on your theaters for whatever kind of pricing they're doing or whatnot. So I'm glad that it didn't increase again and that it's still within an acceptable range, but keep an eye out on that. But I had fun with this movie. This is definitely more comedic and a little bit of action. I mean, there's action scenes and everything, but it very much goes very heavily into the comedy. So if you're not into that, you might want to pass on this one. It really does affect the tone. It mainly, in most circumstances, will go for the funny thing over the kind of serious thing, which, in my opinion, kind of hurts the villain because the villain needs more of a serious kind of take with Gore the God Butcher. So even though I enjoyed this movie and think it's good, if I was going through most of the other kind of MCU movies, I wouldn't say it's the best, but I really wouldn't say it's the worst either. It still is a cohesive kind of whole for what it's got. Some of the comedy didn't really land with me on certain things, but overall, for most of the time, it did. So how do we want to go for this? Oh, and Thor is not the joke itself in most circumstances. Like, they get the fat Thor stuff out of the way and kind of deal with it and kind of go forward and actually try and figure out who Thor is and kind of set him on a new kind of path and kind of journey of what's kind of going on. So I do appreciate that. Like, they don't make him just like, oh, this is Fat Thor from Endgame and all that kind of stuff. They do deal with that kind of fallout, but it's never that he as himself is the joke. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I got from the whole Endgame Fat Thor thing. So, we start off, and of course, last we'd seen Thor decided to go off with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and we see him dealing with a Guardians of the Galaxy situation. And for the most part, the Guardians are just there as kind of cameos. They don't really do much with them. If you've seen any of the trailers, you've pretty much seen all of the Guardian parts. So we see that, like, Korg is just pretty much telling these kids kind of Mad Max style all this stuff about Thor. We see, like, oh, okay, he was a little baby Thor with his little hammer as, like, I think his mother was, like, taking him into battle, and we see him kind of growing up. And it's really kind of cool because you see all the different kind of costumes that kind of are gone through the comic books. We see, like, a kind of interesting, more kind of comic accurate, younger kind of Thor thing before he gets through and explains how he's like doing all this stuff. He of course got out of shape when they pretty much explain why he got out of shape because he was losing all the ones that he loved and pretty much made it into kind of like a barrier around himself, and then he decided to get into shape and get to his god bod and try and figure out his place in the world. And it's funny because you see him meditating and stuff like that. And later on in the movie, he brings up, it's like, yeah, it just made me more angry. And it's like, that's really interesting because some people meditate in different ways. Sometimes just sitting and trying to contemplate something isn't effective for them. Sometimes they have to do something or be involved in some kind of thing to, like, get into a meditative zone to, like, get through their things. And we see he had, like, pretty much buried Stormbreaker, and then Quill comes up and is like, hey, Thor, we kind of need your help with this thing. And he's like, all right, I got this. And throws off this thing, and pretty much in this 80s attire. We then have Guns N' Roses pretty much blasting as he's just, like, wrecking wholesale ass. And this movie is almost like a Guns N' Roses tribute music video kind of thing, which is kind of awesome because most of the song selection works for what's happening. Because sometimes you get into an effect that somebody's like, oh, okay, these people really like these really good older songs to these, like, action scenes or whatnot. It's like, no, you can't just be like, you just don't put a song to something and it just works. You have to make sure that the song and what's happening works as well. And you just see Thor blasted through trying to help these people, help their kind of, like, temple kind of thing with these weird kind of bird-like things. And he's doing all these crazy action things. He does this, like, Van Damme kind of split thing. And the effects are pretty awesome. They at least works well enough that you're like, okay, this is happening in the MCU. And the Guardians are looking on like, what the fuck? They're gonna like, can this guy leave? Oh, he goes and he accidentally like breaks the temple and everything. And the people are like, hey, cool, here's this kind of gift. And gives them these goats. And spoiler, these goats are going to be throughout the whole movie. Now, I put that because a lot of people would probably be like, this is a South Park beat it till it's dead kind of joke. And if it hit you that way, I'm not going to say you're wrong. Because we got these goats that are screaming throughout the movie. And the thing is, it follows a pattern of like, okay, it's kind of funny the first time. And then the second time and the third time rolling around, you're like, this is going to kind of get annoying. And then they kind of leave it off for a couple beats. And you're like, okay. And then it comes back and you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of funny again. That's kind of where I was with it. If you're annoyed throughout the whole movie with those screaming goats, I completely understand it. And it's not going to be for you with that kind of thing. Now, granted, they do not utilize it enough of like, hey, it's the 30-minute mark. Fucking hit those goats. Not like that. Now, granted, this movie is also 1 minute shy of 2 hours, and it moves along at a brisk kind of pace. There are some spots where there could have been like some better kind of ways to kind of like get through certain things, but overall, it's like, all right, this moves along at a good clip. And the thing is, the Guardians are like, all right, Jesus, we got to deal with these goats. And he's like, oh no, they're okay, and if anything goes wrong, we'll just eat them as meat. And it's like, or take them to a meeting or whatnot. And the goats are like, the fuck are you gonna do? And then they start seeing all these kind of distress calls. And see, in the beginning of the movie, we had been introduced to Gore the God Butcher. And this was a very effective kind of introduction. It was very serious. We see Gore with his daughter. Now, granted, this is going to be kind of a change up from the comics. Mainly because, not in his beginning introduction, but later on the lore connects into the Venom symbiotes and stuff. And that's the whole Sonyverse, so they kind of have to reconfigure certain things of how it kind of works. But he's a very pious dude. He's asking for help for their god that they worship to save his daughter. However, sadly, his daughter dies. And he is lying next to the grave and pretty much looks like he's waiting to join her. However, he then hears something calling to him, and he goes into this oasis and he sees his god. And he's like, he like goes through, he gets cut by something, and we see his hand heal almost instantaneously. He's like, what the hell? And then he starts eating this fruit. He's like, oh, look at this little tiny creature eating my fruit and everything. We're just celebrating a hunt that we killed that dude who had the necro sword. And he's like, everything was worth it. Your empire might be gone, but what about the glorious afterlife? He's like, there isn't one, you stupid bastard. And he's like, for nothing? No, you've done it for my glory and stuff. It's like, yeah, that is a god not deserving of worship. And then he's pretty much getting ready to kill Gore for pretty much being like, screw you. And then, of course, the Necro Sword comes up and he uses it and kills him. And this sets him upon his path of killing all of the gods. He's like, nope. And we see it, of course, the Necro Sword infecting him and cursing him pretty much. Well, this leads us to pretty much the part where we see Thor and Quill. There's all these distress calls. All these gods are dying, and all these kind of crazy things are kind of going on. And Thor sees one from Sif, so the Guardians are going to go check out the other distress signals, and Thor is going to go with Korg and the goats to Sif, so he utilizes Stormbreaker to utilize the Bifrost and goes and sees this one god lying like in the pages from the comic book, and he says he was one of the like most peaceful gods ever. Like he wouldn't have hurt of anyone. And he goes down and we see that Sif is like, she's lost an arm. She's like, no, just leave me. I've been tracking this madman, and the thing is, like, I died in battle, and I can go to Valhalla. And Thor's like, you didn't die, you survived. Granted, your arm might be in Valhalla, but you know what? You're not dead in battle. It's like, she's like, shit, fuck. All right, so they're pretty much like, okay, this dude's going after gods. Let's go check into Asgard and see what's kind of going on. That kind of also lines up. And if I'm a little bit scattered, this movie is kind of a little bit scattered as well for what kind of information we kind of get. until we kind of get to the end where everything kind of converges. We also are reintroduced back to Jane Foster as we see that she is getting chemo treatment and that she's got stage 4 cancer. And it's funny because she's got a book. She's really renowned in her field. She's trying to explain this thing to this dude who was reading her book, and he's like, "You destroyed your book." And we see that Darcy comes in and be like, "Listen, Jane, you got to get better. You got to focus on fighting this." And she's like, she just wants to get back to her work. And Selvig's like, "I'm sorry, Jane. There's nothing much else we can do. I wanted to really help you with this, but I don't know." And then, of course, she's trying to find every science, but then she starts looking into the magical stuff, like Mjolnir. It's like, okay. And, of course, that's kind of where everything kind of starts to converge. And we also get an important bit that Korg relates pretty much the relationship that Thor and Jane had. That they were together and everything was kind of good. We see this kind of like couple stuff, but then they started drifting apart, mainly because of Thor's fear of losing people. And we see that exacerbated throughout most of his story in the MCU. And Quill gave him this kind of word advice before he left the Guardians, in that, you know what, it's not really good to shut yourself off. Sometimes you need to find something that if you lose, you'd feel really shitty about. Like, it's better to feel that shitty about losing love rather than never have loved. It's like, yeah, pretty good there. And of course, that's a giant beat throughout the movie. It's part of Gor's story, Jane's story, and Thor's story. So I kind of like that. Let's see. And it's kind of funny seeing them kind of like go and do other things. Thor calling Nick Fury Nick Furry on the phone. Like, he didn't call him, but that's what he was in his contacts. But they start drifting apart, and Jane writes this letter that pretty much seals it for Thor, and Thor's like, "You left." And then when they talk again, she's like, "Well, maybe you left and then just came back." And it's like, interesting. There's always different kind of ways with certain kind of relationships to view them. But we see that Jane goes to New Asgard, and we see so many crazy ass things. Like Valkyrie as the king has to deal with stupid shit. We see her doing an Old Spice commercial, opening up an Infinity Cones ice cream thing. Now, granted, people are going to be like, why would they do something for Thanos there? However, Odin had a fake Infinity Gauntlet in his treasure room, so the Asgardians could have other kind of ideas of what an Infinity Gauntlet is, so I'm not going to be like they're making it in like a Thanos-themed thing. But we see Viking cruises around New Asgard. We see him taking boats and flying around and everything. We get the thing about where these actors pretty much play out the previous movie. I'm like, okay, interesting joke. We see them pretty much playing out Odin's death scene. And I'm like, okay, I don't know why this is here, but alright. I would have cut that and done anything else for the story or whatnot. Not that I don't mind it, it's just out of place. It doesn't add as much value as it could. Let's see here. So Jane is pretty much on part of one of the tours, and we see that they've pretty much collected Mjolnir all together, and we see that Mjolnir was pretty much calling to Jane, and that it reforms, and we see lightning and stuff like that. It's like, holy shit! And it's important because during the relationship kind of thing that we see that Thor imbues another kind of enchantment on Mjolnir to protect Jane. So it's like, okay, they understand she's worthy, and she utilizes Mjolnir, as we've seen throughout the trailers and all that. Let's see here. So we see also that Gorr decides to go to Asgard, New Asgard, and see kind of what's up, utilizing the Necrosword to create kind of eldritch shadow monsters, and sets them about on Asgard. And we see that Thor kind of pops up and like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, bringing back Sif and everything, trying to see what's kind of going on, and it's attacking everything. He's doing some kick-ass stuff. Of course, then we see Jane introduced as the mighty Thor, and he's like, Mjolnir, and tries to like grab it, but then we see her utilizing it in various different ways that is kind of reformed but can be utilized in a shotgun kind of approach and blasted off in various different directions, which is pretty cool. Now, granted, that doesn't really happen in the comics because everything that kind of happens with Gore and Jane is in a very different kind of state. And granted, the MCU has to adapt and pick its own kind of ways to how to do these things. And overall, the changes work out well. I'm like, okay, they destroyed Mjolnir in Thor Ragnarok, so they kind of have to make it do some weirder kind of shit in order for it to work out. Let's see. And Thor is just off put, and he's like, oh, I could get into my regular kind of outfit because he had this one that's got like fur and everything, but then he gets a more armored approach, and then he sees Jane and he's like completely thrown for his loop. I think that's where they put like their whole kind of relationship kind of bit. And they just keep fighting the monsters. We see Valkyrie helping out and everything, but then we see that Gore comes in and is trying to attack Thor, and Thor gets kind of like, oh damn shit, and then Gore kind of buggers off, and then he uses his monsters to capture all the children of Asgard. And one of them is Heimdall's son, Astrid/Axel, and it's because he likes Guns N' Roses and decides to go with the name Axel. We then see all of the parents are freaked out and everything. They're trying to get information from Valkyrie. We see that also Stormbreaker is getting surly because Thor was interested in seeing what was going on with Mjolnir, and it's acting kind of weird. He's trying to like call Mjolnir to him, but then we see Stormbreaker just pooping, and we see him pretty much try and calm down people as much as possible, say we're going to go and get the kids back. And then he tries to kind of fly off, but like, of course, Stormbreaker's kind of acting surly, and he just falls back down, and he's like, alright, Jane tried to find Gore, but couldn't do it either, and then that's when Axel's able to utilize the same kind of stuff that Heimdall's able to, with his eyes and all that. He calls Thor there, and pretty much is like explaining their kind of situation. He's like, alright, we're going to come and get you, let's see what's going on, and he's able to figure out it's in the Shadow Realm, and that they are going to need like gods, and they want to create a team to kind of like go after and save these children. So since Stormbreaker is like, this is fuck you kind of shit, they decide to take one of the tour boats, use Stormbreaker as a conduit to channel the Bifrost and have the goats pulling it, which is more from the comics and more from the legends, because Thor did have a kind of boat/chariot kind of thing that he would have goats like these to pull. So they decide to go to Omnipotent City to try and get other gods to go and help Asgard get their children back. And we hear Thor listing off like Ra, which is nice to kind of connect into with Moon Knight, with the Egyptian gods, but they get there and they kind of sneak in as these other kind of gods, and we are introduced to Russell Crowe's Zeus, and he's just being a complete dillhole. Overall, I'm good with his performance. His fake kind of Greek accent's really kind of weird, but he definitely is the asshole god Zeus. He's like, alright, doing the orgies and stuff, and just doing his own kind of thing. Thor, of course, is kind of thunderstruck by him because he was his kind of hero. He looked up to Zeus. They're being pretty much the same kind of thing. Lightning and sky and thunder god. And him throwing around the lightning bolt. Valkyrie's like, alright, if anything, we just at least need the lightning bolt for help. And of course, they're talking, and then Zeus is like, who's talking over me? Get down here. And of course, he's like, trying to ask for help. He's like, alright, screw this disguise. And of course, Thor gets naked and everything, and he's going to do the same for the other kind of disguises, but then Thor pleads his case that Asgard's children need help, that Gore the God Butcher is going around killing gods, and he needs their help. He's like, wow, he's just been going after low-level deities. Fuck that shit. And also, it's Asgard's problem. It's like, he wants to destroy all the gods in existence, and you are arrogant enough to let children be in harm's way. just because it's not your problem. Trust me, that does track with Zeus's level of fuckery in anything. So, yeah. That's just like, well, fuck you, buddy. Like, what the hell? And of course, Valkyrie's like, well, evidently we're not getting any gods for this kind of shit. And they just start kind of like fighting these kind of, I think they're automatons, because they're bleeding gold and everything. I'm like, why are they killing these people? It's like, they might not be people. They might just be like, automatons or what kind of not. And good action scene, but then Zeus is like getting kind of pissed off with this and decides to throw his thunderbolt at Korg, and this really pisses off Thor, and he decides to he's able to get a hold of the thunderbolt and throws it back at Zeus and takes him in the sternum. It's like, god damn, he killed him. And evidently Korg's not dead. His face has survived, and they take it with them, and they take the thunderbolt, and they leave as we see Celestials in there. It's like, okay, cool, because they're deity level as well. Now, granted, I could understand why people are like, okay, Korg kind of got into a weird kind of position, but it kind of also tracks in certain kind of Norse mythology as well, where Thor would have like a severed head of like Mimir from like the God of War games, or like Loki in even the comics for like advice and whatnot. So I am like, okay, death fake out, but him being a kind of head thing kind of works. It's like, all right, because it tracks with the mythology. So I'm like, all right. So we also see that Gore is kind of talking to the kids as well, because they're pretty much trying to make themselves feel a little bit better, talking about all the exploits that Thor's done. It's like, oh yeah, let me tell you thing about this kind of weird snake thing. Ripped its head off. It's like, what? You liked it a minute ago when you were talking about Thor doing it. And he's not trying to be funny or anything. He's a very serious character. And the thing is, his seriousness works for the character and is correct for the character. However, it almost doesn't really fit with the tone of this movie. It's like way more comedic. And the thing is, if they were going more comedic, they should have completely went full in on that. Like, there's enough seriousness in this that it kind of works against that to a degree. But yet, there's so much comedy that it kind of fucks over the seriousness as well, if that makes any kind of sense. Almost kind of like certain animes with like tonal whiplash, where you got some kind of funny thing that happens and then it gets really serious, or something serious happens and the weirdest outlandish kind of fucking thing happens. It's like, alright, I don't know if I'm supposed to be laughing about this or being like, what the fuck is going on here? So we pretty much get some weird, interesting information as they're pretty much on a boat and pretty much just like trying to ruminate and figure out what their next kind of plan of attack is. Korg gives us information on how his people pretty much reproduce. It's like, interesting. And then Jane and Thor are trying to figure out what's going on. Thor is trying to be as... he's trying to explain the whole thing that Peter kind of told him about. And kind of works with it, but he still kind of messes it up a little bit. And then Jane blurts out that she's got cancer and everything. And he's like, okay, we don't know how much time, but let's do this. And the thing is, Mjolnir doesn't cure her cancer. It actually kind of fights her body, like, it makes it harder for her body to fight the cancer. Like, in the comics, she still was going to chemo treatments while turning into Thor. And in the comics, every time she would turn into Thor, it would, like, purge her body of the toxins. But the thing is, she would need the chemotoxins. Well, the body would deem it toxins because you're trying to kill some kind of weird shit that's going on in your body. However, Mjolnir would purge that and thereby, like, nullifying the treatment that she's getting. However, here, it's more like it's fucking with her body's ability to, like, fight the cancer, and that becomes important later on, because they do a good job of showing her, like, in beefed Thor mode and in cancer mode as well. It's like, good deal on that. But they're trying to figure it out, and Thor's like, I'm with you, alright? And then, of course, they kiss, and then they get into the Shadow Realm, and they get into this planet, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. They don't see the children anywhere, but we see that Jane is able to deduce from drawings and everything that he needs the axe Stormbreaker to use the Bifrost to get to Eternity, and if he gets to Eternity, well, the first person who gets to eternity can have any wish that they want granted, and he could ask for all the gods to be killed or wiped from existence. You could say that that's kind of similar to a Thanos kind of thing, but in a very kind of separate kind of way. More kind of quest based, and eternity is like the embodiment, one of the embodiments of the universe. So I think it's really kind of cool that they're bringing in that kind of concept. In the comics, he decides to try and build this god bomb that'll explode and take out all of the deities throughout all of time and existence. So that kind of change I kind of like, because it's tying in a bigger kind of mythological, cosmic mythology in the Marvel Universe into the MCU. So I'm like, yes. And we see that Jane decides to hurl Stormbreaker off the planet, but they get captured by Gore, and he pretty much tries to get them into a scenario where he has to call Stormbreaker to save them, and of course he does, because he loves them and he wants to protect them. And we also see that he's trying his hardest to be like, all right, come on. And then, of course, he does call it back, and we get this giant battle where we see Valkyrie using Zeus's Thunderbolt, and Jane using Mjolnir, and of course Thor with Stormbreaker. But we see that he stabs Valkyrie with the Necro Sword. Now, again, it's just a stab wound at this point, but it kind of throws him off enough that he is able to get Well, he tries to Bifrost them out, but in the ensuing chaos, Gore is able to rip Stormbreaker from him and utilize it and take the children to the Altar of Eternity. So we see that he is trying to kind of figure out how to get there, and let me see here. I know Jane used that. Because, see, they're utilizing Stormbreaker. God, how did he get there? Because he had this kind of thing. He's able to see that Valkyrie is okay. Jane is... She pretty much had to drop the hammer, and if she transforms one more time, she's going to die. And they have a kind of adult conversation about it. Now, granted, Thor's more like, please don't do this. I know you want to help me, and I know you are a good Thor, and that Thor would fight, but he wants more time with her because he's lost so many other people. And you really get Thor's side on that, but you also get Jane's of like, I want to help these children, and I want to help you too, even if it kills me. So you understand both sides. And we see that as he's also like giving her like stuff from the vending machine and all that, and it's Asgardian medicine too, and they can't really do much. And he of course talks to Valkyrie. That's how he does. He uses Zeus's Thunderbolt to teleport, which needed kind of some more explanation, but it's like, okay, cool. So he does that. We see that Gore pretty much sets himself up, and he's pretty much waiting for the Bifrost thing to open up. We see that Thor pops in, and he sees the kids. He talks them down, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna kind of need your guys' help here. And we get a really cool moment where he essentially acts kind of like the Allfather, and he says, all right, go around and get any kind of weapons you got. He's like, listen, you're Space Vikings, you're Asgardians today. We need your help, and we're gonna do this. And he decides to utilize Zeus's Thunderbolt and the magic that, of course, the Asgardians have to enchant all the things that they've had for the smallest of time, for them to be worthy and to have the powers of Thor. And it was just really kind of cool to see them kind of work up to that. And I really like it because we still get some kind of cool character development with Axel as he's utilizing his father's powers, as he's trying to keep it together and make sure all the kids are okay. And then they just kind of go off, and they got all these crazy-ass weapons as Gore unleashes these shadow beasts on them, and they just fucking rip into them. And it's just crazy seeing like this little girl with this stuffed rabbit and utilizing like a giant death beam blast. It's like, yes, it's crazy, yes, it's funny, yes, it's strange, but it also works because Thor's trying to help these kids, and he's the only one there, and he's got this thunderbolt, and he's got to fight the Necrosword dude. So he's got to have somebody watching his back to take on the Shadow Beast while he goes on to fight Gorr. But the thing is, he doesn't get the complete upper hand, and Gorr's pretty much getting ready to kill him, and Jane pops up, and she teleports in utilizing Valkyrie's Pegasus. And he's sad about it, but he needed it. And the thing is, they got to try and break the Necrosword to destroy it. And we see him doing their kind of stuff. We see Gorr calling her Lady Thor, and she's like, nope, I'm Mighty Thor, I'm Dr. Jane Foster, and you can eat my hammer. And she smacks it down, and her delivery on that was good, because throughout the whole movie she's trying to develop this catchphrase, and it's like, oh yeah, okay. Because Thor had his catchphrase in the beginning of the movie, and it's like, alright, cool. But they're breaking through it, and the thing is, we can see that she's, of course, fucked up as well, kind of beat up from the fight, but then she utilizes, they break the sword, but it's kind of reforming back, so she, like, holds some of it in Mjolnir, and then unleashes a hellacious kind of blast, and, of course, we can see that she's fading because of utilizing that much power. And the thing is, the Bifrost has opened up the portal, Gorr goes in, and we see that it's Thor and Jane and Gorr at Eternity. And Thor's able to pretty much call him out and like, listen, I know you don't want to do this. The only reason you're here is love. You might say that you want to utilize Eternity to kill the gods, but you can also ask for your daughter back. And then Thor just kind of lets him to do his kind of thing while he holds and kind of consoles Jane as she's dying. And they have their kind of cool little moment. And he's like, oh, that's a pretty good catchphrase there. And then they kiss, and she dies and turns into golden dust, similar to Odin. Which is like, huh, interesting there. And the thing is, Gorr was like, if I bring her back as she was still alive, I'm dying soon because of the effects of the Necrosword. She'll be alone. And they're both like, no, she won't be. And that's like, Thor would take care of her. So instead of utilizing Eternity to kill all of the gods, he does ask for his daughter to be returned back to life. And she kind of consoles him as he's dying, and looks off to Thor to like protect her and take care of her. And he nods to her, and he dies. It's like, okay. So then we see pretty much all the kids brought back. We see that Lady Sif's okay with her one arm, training everyone. Sif is training Axel, which is pretty kind of cool. We see Valkyrie training some of the other children as well, and everything kind of coming back to a nice kind of ending. And then we see that Thor is going around and is pretty much turned into a dad, and is acting as pretty much dad, Uncle Thor, to the little girl who's named Love. And we see also Korg pretty much talking about his stuff. He finds a boyfriend named Dwayne, and it's stupid, but it's like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson kind of a joke, and I'm like, okay, that was good. And we see him pretty much making pancakes for her as she's reading like Jane Foster's kind of book. She's like, I don't like those. I'm like, you haven't even eaten them yet. And he's like, all right, do you have your boots on? And she's like, yep. And he's like, don't come complaining to me when your feet hurt from that. She's like, fine. And she like got a little bit testy as well, and then like laser beamed his frying pan with like purple laser eyes. And the thing is, it's like, okay, you might be like, what the fuck's going on? She was like rebirthed by Eternity, so she is kind of one of the most powerful beings in existence. Okay, like Eternity's a big kind of level, so I don't know. Like, I kind of want a little bit more explanation of why she's got those powers, but it also doesn't surprise me that she's kind of got those powers. So we see them kind of gearing up for battle. We see that she's drawn on Mjolnir, and it's cool to see that Thor's got Mjolnir back. And it's like, alright, let's get to this. She's got her boots on and everything. She's the one that's got Stormbreaker now, and he's running around with Mjolnir. It's like, okay, yeah, she can handle that weapon, even though it's a king's weapon. And Thor was talking about how it would probably melt certain people's brains, but she can handle it, and they go into battle to help protect these people. So he's going around being like a space Viking dad, teaching and taking care of this girl, and Korg's like, it gives us the whole kind of lowdown of like, and their kind of exploits were known as Love and Thunder because she's love, he's the god of thunder. And I'm like, hey, that worked out. Normally, when it's on the nose for like what a film is called, I'm usually like, it's either executed well or it's executed very poorly, and you're like, eye roll kind of shit. This one I didn't feel that. I'm like, alright. Seeing him going into battle and just like helping people, I'm like, yeah, that's Thor. That's why he's a good god and a good guy and a good superhero. It's like, yeah, he goes out, he helps people, and he does things. He might not always do the best thing. He might not always be the smartest on what's going on, but he definitely tries to help people. And that's where the movie ends. And then we get into the first post-credit scene. This one is definitely kind of connecting more with the MCU's kind of stuff. We see that Zeus is alive, and just as a whole, and he's like pissed off because people are more worshipping superheroes than gods. Never mind the fact that it's very interesting that like superhero myths are built and predicated upon certain god myths like Hercules and the heroes of like the Greek pantheon, and also various other cultures and Norse, Egyptian, all of those. It's interesting that the old gods would be pissed off with the kind of new gods. These superheroes, it's like, I want you to take him out of the sky, Hercules. And then we are shown the MCU's Hercules, which, yes, Hercules is in the comics as well. And there's a little bit of a tiff between him and Thor at first, but then they became best kind of friends and allies, and Hercules even became an Avenger. So it's cool. I'm like, yay! Alright, cool. Also, Ares has been involved in the Marvel Comics as well, so it'd be interesting if that kind of comes into any kind of play either. He is not as agreeable as Hercules, so we'll see how that kind of works out. And then the last one we get is a nice bookend. I liked Jane's death and kind of her send-off, but here it shows that like that gold thing was taking her to Valhalla, showing that that asshole god that there are afterlives. There are vast other things that we don't even know about the universe. Because we've also seen the Egyptian underworld in Moon Knight as well. And we see that she was greeted by her, and I was like, guess you're dead too. And I had seen people talking about how like it was a missed joke opportunity to not show Sif's arm there. But it was kind of cool to see that like, yes, she died in battle and was brought to Valhalla, and that we see the hall and everything, and we got to see Heimdall again, and it was really cool to see that. And I'm like, that's a nice kind of cap and cherry on top for me. It didn't need to be there, but I'm glad it was there. And that is where the movie ends. So I did like that they meditated on love and relationships and the vast kind of things, like people having relationships with significant others, but also parents and their relationships to kids, and what kind of traumas can like drive you to do good things and horrible things. Like Thor did kind of self-destructive things because of the pain that he felt from losing people, but then at the end he has accepted that pain of losing people, because it's better to feel that than to feel nothing, and to just go through life and be like, whatever, and stop this. Because Gore took his thing and was like, I did everything for these gods, and they failed me. Why do we need them? And then to not do the same things to them and be wrathful, shitty assholes and just take out others. And it was cool that when he had the choice, he chose to bring back his daughter and to give her the life that he couldn't before. So I did like that overall kind of arc and message throughout this story. Now, I think, even though I like comedies and everything, I think that this needed a better balance of it. Not saying that it is a completely bad movie, but if it was going completely comedic, there are vast other kind of Thor villains that they could have used. Gore deserved better, even though I don't think he was completely fucked over with this movie. I'm not going to say that. I do think that if you went heavy metal like the comics and just went that he is in, because in the comics it's not just a sword, it's like a symbiote. He's got it. He makes like weird kind of different kind of implements to kill people with, and he essentially becomes a god into of himself. And of course, he fucking hates that. He's like, I don't want to be a god. So I'm all right with this adaptation of Gore, but I hope that at some point we do get a more faithful adaptation to him. Like, they did it enough, but it's mainly because of how much this movie wanted to be a comedy, and they did the comedic stuff, versus anything that they inherently did wrong with the character, because they really didn't. So, this was definitely an interesting one for me, because I liked it, even with its problems, and think that it's still a pretty good MCU movie, and that if you're wanting to see a weird, crazy Thor tale, more in the vein of Ragnarok, I think you guys would enjoy this one. But if you don't, that's cool too. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see anything where this is like, okay, really, really bad. Like, it doesn't go overly long. It doesn't go overly short. There's certain bits and pieces that could have been taken out or like changed up to have an improved flow, but overall I was happy with what they were able to do. So those are my opinions on the movie. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.